always like to start these presentations, whether they're now virtual for the last year or certainly in person, with a moment of gratitude. To anchor myself, especially in a profound sense of gratitude that I get to do this work at all. I get to speak to you about my trauma. I get to speak to you, most importantly, about my resilience. And I hope that I can shine a spotlight on your own as well. So I'd like to take this moment in the middle of the day on a Wednesday, in the middle still of a global pandemic, to invite you to do the same, to find a moment of peaceful gratitude. I would ask you to think about a person who made you who you are today, who contributed to your life in such a way that you're entirely different now because of the time that you spent together. This could be somebody who you've spent your whole life with or a long period of time. It could be somebody who only passed through your life for a brief period of time. Now, if you're comfortable doing this, and I recognize not everybody is, if you have a pen handy, if you can write that person's first name just on the back of your hand, somewhere that, not on your palm so you don't get all sweaty and then wipe their name off. I like to write it on the back of my hand so that way I can come back to it later. Another alternative, if you have your phone handy, you can set an alarm or a reminder, a timer. You can put that person's name in the title of the alarm and then set it for some time later today. I'd like you to put that person's name in there because I want to come back to them for a moment. The name that I wrote on my own hand earlier because we have a condensed time today, his name is Mike. And Mike is the man who saved my life. Those of you who are already familiar with my story probably have heard me talk about him before because I've been talking about him for longer than I haven't, actually. Because Mike intervened for me at a time when I was convinced that it was the end. I was only 15 years old. I had climbed up over the railing of a bridge in my hometown of Sydney, Nova Scotia. And I thought that I would never be able to escape that place, both Sydney, Nova Scotia, and the place in which I had found myself in my mind. This place of such profound anguish, of hopelessness and helplessness, of feeling completely trapped and nothing would ever get better. But something for me did change that day. It ended up being the last time I ever tried to kill myself. I remember leaving the revolving door of the hospital that time and feeling the warmth of the sun. And the receptionist had made a comment as she was calling the taxi company, just an offhand comment, noticing that it was the first day of spring. The taxi arrived and I went home with a sense of purpose, or at least the seeds thereof. I couldn't help but focus on this image of these two men over my shoulders that night. The stranger in the light brown jacket who had my back and who eventually reached out and saved my life, and the stranger on the sidelines who had no interest in getting to know my story at all. And I couldn't help but think, how can these two men see this exact same situation unfold in front of them, yet have two wildly different responses to that situation? And I think that's when I first started to realize that maybe I had more choice in my life than I thought that I had. Maybe I could choose which of those two men I wanted to be like. When presented with the same difficult situation, did I want to be on the sidelines or did I want to have people's backs? I think then that's when I chose to be like the stranger in the light brown jacket who saved my life. I wanted to reach out and connect to others. So within a few weeks, actually, of that final suicide attempt, or what ended up being my final suicide attempt, I started speaking openly about my own story. I felt like everybody knew it anyway, so why not just tell it myself? I went to my high school principal. I told him I wanted to speak with my peers about my struggles. The high school principal promptly said no. So I went home and I wrote a letter to our local newspaper, the Cape Breton Post. I likened the high school administration to communist Russia for stifling my free speech. And the next morning, there were CTV news cameras in the principal's office asking why it wasn't okay to talk about mental health and suicide in school. From that moment, my biggest fear was that everybody would treat me differently if they found out about this deep, dark secret that I held inside. And the exact opposite happened. When I was all over the newspaper and all over the evening news in my little hometown, people began to approach me to tell me their story too. They didn't treat me as different. I was suddenly part of the in crowd of all of these people who knew suffering too. with that motivation, I think it began the upward spiral of speaking more and opening up more, providing a platform for even more people to open up about their struggles too. What I quickly learned was that people want to talk about really hard things. The problem is that not enough people are asking.